A new day dawns on April 6, 1945, in the vast expanse of the East China Sea, off the coast of Okinawa, where the formidable Task Force 58 of the United States Fifth Fleet carves through the waves. Stationed 16 miles from the main fleet, like sentinels on a lonely frontier, sailors aboard radar picket destroyers feel their gaze drawn to the horizon, sensing with a primal certainty the storm that gathers just beyond sight. In the dimly lit Combat Information Center of the USS Lee, radar operators witness an electronic tide of incoming contacts, a deluge not of dozens, but of hundreds, flooding their screens. On the decks above, the ship's 5-inch gun crews rhythmically load shells, each one bearing the enigmatic VT designation, a cryptic mark for the miniaturized radio transmitters nestled within that were destined to rewrite the rules of naval warfare. The objective is stark, born of desperation, to endure Operation Kikusui No. 1, the inaugural wave in a series of 10 immense, coordinated kamikaze onslaughts. As the clock strikes 0600 hours, the sky transforms, filling with a swarm of aircraft. Through the morning's humid haze drifts a sound that will forever be synonymous with the battle for Okinawa, the relentless, soul-shaking drone of hundreds of Japanese aircraft engines, advancing in relentless waves. In their cockpits, pilots are sealed for a final journey, having severed all thought of return. Spearheading this aerial assault are the elite pilots of the Imperial Japanese Navy's Special Attack Units, their Zero fighters and Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bombers straining under the weight of 250 kilograms bombs, followed by successive waves of older aircraft, all pressed into the ultimate service of suicide. Tucked among them, specially trained Oka pilots sit entombed within rocket-powered flying bombs, cradled beneath the wings of Mitsubishi G-4M Betty bombers. The events about to unfold will serve as a dramatic testament to the revolutionary power of American proximity fuse technology, revealing precisely why the Japanese kamikaze tactics, so terrifyingly effective at first, would inevitably crumble against the most sophisticated anti-aircraft system ever sent to war. The American VT Proximity Fuze had finally arrived in the Pacific Theater, its presence the culmination of 2 years of rigorous combat testing that all began with a single, historic shot. This marvel of engineering was born from a high-stakes crash program launched in 1940, championed by Section T of the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory under the visionary guidance of Dr. Merle Tuve. The proximity fuse stood as one of the 3 most vital secret projects of World War II, its importance ranked alongside the invention of radar and the creation of the atomic bomb. Its operation was based on a principle of brilliant simplicity. A miniature radio transmitter receiver would continuously emit radio waves and meticulously measure their return frequency. The moment the Doppler shift indicated an object was tantalizingly close, the fuse would trigger, detonating the shell automatically. Gunners would no longer be burdened with the impossible task of estimating exact distances and setting delicate mechanical timers. Now, the shell itself would know precisely when to explode. The technical hurdles had been nothing short of staggering. The fuse's intricate components, including minuscule glass vacuum tubes crafted by Sylvania, had to endure the crushing force of 20,000 times gravity, as they were violently expelled from a 5-inch gun. The projectile would scream through the air at 2,600 feet per second, all while spinning at a dizzying 25,000 revolutions per minute from the gun's rifling. Every single component had to survive this violent birth and then function with unwavering reliability in temperatures that could swing from a blistering 100 degrees to a frigid -50 degrees Fahrenheit. By April of 1945, a testament to American industrial might, factories had churned out over 15 million proximity fuses specifically for naval deployment in the Pacific. The immense task of manufacturing had been strategically spread across a network of contractors. The Crosley Corporation, a titan among them, single-handedly produced 5,205,913 fuses, accounting for a staggering 24% of the total output. Giants like RCA, Eastman Kodak, General Electric, and McQuay Norris joined this colossal effort, forming a web of 87 different firms that utilized 110 factories, each dedicated to various stages of the production process. This monumental industrial mobilization guaranteed that the American forces poised at Okinawa were armed with the most advanced anti-aircraft ammunition the world had ever seen. The United States Navy, recognizing the shifting tides of war, had dramatically increased its allocation of proximity fuses, from just 25% of its anti-aircraft ammunition in 1943 to a dominant 75% by 1945. This strategic shift was a clear acknowledgement that the brutal reality of combat in the Pacific, defined by the terrifying Kamikaze attacks, demanded nothing less than a revolutionary leap in defensive power. Every destroyer, every cruiser, and every battleship in the fleet now carried thousands of these VT-fused 5-inch shells, their primary shield against the specter of suicide attacks. Standing in stark, grim contrast was the Japanese Kamikaze program, a strategy conceived from the depths of desperation. After suffering catastrophic losses in the Marianas and the decisive Battle of the Philippine Sea, Japan found itself stripped of the majority of its veteran pilots and its precious aircraft carriers. It was Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, the commander of the First Air Fleet, who had grimly proposed the creation of these special attack units back in October 1944, arguing with stark realism that conventional tactics were no longer a match for the overwhelming firepower of the American forces. The Kamikaze was Japan's desperate gamble, an attempt to morph its remaining pool of inexperienced pilots into living, breathing, precision-guided weapons. On paper, the grim mathematics seemed to favor them. While traditional aerial attacks struggled to achieve hit rates of a mere 2% against the heavily fortified American ships, the initial kamikaze assaults in the Philippines had shocked the world with success rates soaring above 34%. A single pilot, sealed within a Zero fighter armed with a 250 kg bomb, held the potential to cripple or sink a destroyer, a chilling trade of one life and one obsolete aircraft for hundreds of American casualties and millions of dollars in naval hardware. The kamikaze pilots themselves were rushed through an abbreviated training regimen that placed a heavy emphasis on spiritual fortification rather than advanced flying skills. A great many of these young men had logged fewer than 100 hours in the air, a stark contrast to the 500-plus hours of their seasoned predecessors who had struck Pearl Harbor. They were taught the bare essentials: basic navigation, ship identification, and most critically, the final, terrifying diving approach designed to slip past the curtain of anti-aircraft fire. These pilots would pen their final letters home, partake in solemn sake toasts, and be presented with samurai swords or rising sun headbands, symbols of a sacred duty, before embarking on their one-way missions. But no amount of spiritual steeling could possibly prepare them for the technological revolution they were about to face. The Oka suicide weapon stood as the ultimate, horrifying expression of the kamikaze philosophy. Nicknamed Baka, the Japanese word for fool, by the American sailors who faced it, this piloted bomb was a terrifying package, carrying a massive 1,200 kilograms warhead propelled by 3 solid-fuel rocket motors. With the ability to reach a breathtaking maximum speed of 575 miles per hour in its terminal dive, it was engineered to be an unstoppable force of destruction once released. Yet, it possessed a fatal flaw, a vulnerability in its very design. Its range was a mere 10 miles, forcing the lumbering, vulnerable Betty bombers that carried them to fly directly into the teeth of the formidable American defenses. The difference in defensive doctrine was absolute. American ships at Okinawa were arranged in concentric rings of layered protection, with the radar picket destroyers pushed far out to provide the crucial early warning and to absorb the initial, brutal shock of the attacks. Each of these destroyers was a floating fortress, armed with 12 to 16 5-inch guns, all capable of firing the revolutionary VT-fused shells and creating vast, overlapping fields of lethal fire. The proximity fuse transformed these guns from mere area denial weapons into instruments of surgical precision. A 5-inch VT shell boasted a lethal burst radius of an incredible 70 feet, a massive improvement over the mere 20 feet offered by traditional time-fused shells. Even more critically, this new fuse completely eliminated the complex and time-consuming calculations that conventional anti-aircraft fire demanded, empowering gunners to engage enemy targets the very instant they were detected. The morning of April 6, 1945, was destined to be the ultimate crucible for these advanced systems. Operation Kikusui No. 1 was a staggering display of force, involving 391 Navy planes and 133 Army planes, of which 215 Navy and 82 Army aircraft were designated as kamikazes. This amounted to a terrifying total of 297 suicide aircraft converging in a single, coordinated assault. Commander Frederick Julian Beckton of the USS Laffey would later vividly describe the approaching kamikaze waves, recalling that they resembled a relentless swarm of bees, all converging on the only flower in a desolate desert. The first wave hit with fury at 0600, with vigilant radar operators tracking over 50 aircraft hurtling in from the north. The picket destroyers immediately roared to life, opening fire at their maximum range of 12,000 yards with their VT fused shells. The proximity fuses demonstrated their devastating effectiveness almost instantly against the incoming formations. Every shell that passed within the lethal range of an aircraft automatically detonated, saturating the sky with a deadly rain of steel fragments. Unlike the old-time fused shells, which demanded a perfect guess of range to be effective, the VT fuses turned every near miss into a confirmed kill. Within a matter of minutes, dozens of Japanese aircraft were torn from the sky, their broken fuselages plunging into the sea. Their suicide missions were cut short, ending miles from their intended targets, but still, the kamikazes kept coming. At 0744, the USS Laffey found itself at the epicenter of a concentrated attack, with 22 enemy aircraft descending upon it in a harrowing 80-minute ordeal. The destroyer's gunners fought back with incredible ferocity, firing 345 rounds of 5-inch VT ammunition, a barrage that obliterated 9 of the attackers outright. The proximity fuses granted the Laffey's guns the extraordinary ability to engage multiple targets almost simultaneously, rapidly switching between different aircraft without the crippling delays that fuse setting had once required. When the kamikaze pilots resorted to their standard tactic of skimming the wave tops to evade radar detection, the VT fuses proved to be just as lethally effective, detonating when the shells passed close to the sea's surface and creating vertical walls of shrapnel that shredded the low-flying aircraft. Despite this incredibly devastating defensive fire, the Laffey was struck by 6 kamikazes and 4 bombs, yet, through a testament to both the sheer grit of American damage control and the fact that the proximity fuses had prevented countless other attackers from ever reaching their target, the ship survived. The stunning effectiveness of the VT fuse was no mere stroke of luck. This groundbreaking technology had been secretly undergoing combat trials since January 5, 1943. When the USS Helena fired the very first proximity-fused shells in action off the coast of Guadalcanal. Lieutenant Red Cochran, in command of the aft 5-inch battery, achieved a historic victory, shooting down a Japanese Aichi D-3A Val dive bomber with the second of just 3 salvos. The shells hadn't scored direct hits, they had simply passed close enough to trigger the fuse, which then tore the aircraft to pieces with a storm of fragments. This single, decisive success served as the ultimate validation for 3 years of relentless, intensive development that had conquered what many had considered to be insurmountable technical challenges. The fuse itself was a marvel of miniaturization, containing approximately 130 electronic components, all ingeniously packed into a space smaller than a pint milk bottle. Every part was manufactured to tolerances measured in the thousandths of an inch. By the time of the Okinawa campaign, post-battle analysis would starkly reveal the mathematical superiority of this proximity-fused ammunition. The old-time fused 5-inch shells required, on average, a staggering 1,162 rounds to bring down a single kamikaze. In stark contrast, the VT fused shells had slashed this number to just 310 rounds per kill, representing a nearly 4-fold leap in effectiveness. Under optimal conditions, the results were even more breathtakingly dramatic. The destroyer escort USS Abercrombie, for instance, managed to destroy a kamikaze with a mere 2 VT rounds in May of 1945. The destroyer USS Morrison, while defending against a massive kamikaze onslaught on May 4th, shot down 8 attackers in a matter of minutes using its proximity-fused ammunition before ultimately being overwhelmed by the sheer, crushing weight of their numbers. The psychological toll of the proximity fuse on the Japanese pilots was profound and deeply unsettling. Surviving kamikaze pilots who were forced to abort their missions brought back terrifying accounts of approaching American task forces through what felt like solid, impenetrable walls of exploding shells. The distinctive black puffs of the VT explosions seemed to appear with an almost supernatural accuracy, as if the American gunners possessed the uncanny ability to see exactly where each aircraft would be in the next moment. Japanese tactical doctrine had been built on the assumption that high-speed, low-altitude approaches would minimize their exposure to anti-aircraft fire. The proximity fuse rendered these assumptions completely, utterly obsolete. Shells that would have been clean misses by 50 feet with conventional fuses now detonated with lethal proximity, transforming the final, desperate approach into a deadly gauntlet of precisely timed, unavoidable explosions. Vice Admiral Mato Megaki, who directed the kamikaze operations from his base in Kyushu, noted with growing alarm in his personal diary the increasingly devastating effectiveness of the American anti-aircraft defenses. By late April 1945, Japanese naval intelligence was forced to estimate that fewer than 1 in 4 kamikaze aircraft were even managing to reach their targets, a significant drop from the 1 in 3 success rate during the earlier Philippines campaign. The difference, they concluded, was primarily attributable to what Japanese reports could only describe as a new type of anti-aircraft shell that seemed to explode with an impossible, terrifying accuracy. Igaki himself wrote, "The enemy's defensive firepower has increased remarkably. Our special attack aircraft are being destroyed at distances we previously considered safe." Individual American sailors, the men who operated the 5-inch guns loaded with VT ammunition, became legends within their task forces. On the destroyer USS UW Hadley, during the intense attack of May 11, the gun crews claimed an incredible 17 confirmed kamikaze kills, all achieved with proximity-fused ammunition. These gunners perfected a technique of leading the kamikaze aircraft with a continuous stream of fire, effectively creating a wall of VT that the attacking aircraft were forced to fly through. Their gun crews could sustain a blistering rate of fire of 15 rounds per minute, with each shell equipped with its own electronic brain, actively seeking out its target. During one particularly harrowing 52-minute period, the guns of the UW Hadley obliterated multiple kamikazes in rapid succession, with the proximity fuses ensuring that even shells passing slightly above or below the rapidly maneuvering aircraft would still detonate with devastating effect. The story of the USS Aaron Ward during the fierce attacks of May 3 perfectly illustrates the proximity fuse's role as a powerful force multiplier. When a swarm of 40 kamikaze aircraft descended upon the destroyer, her 5-inch batteries fired continuously for an unrelenting 52 minutes. The VT fuse shells completely destroyed 6 of the attackers and damaged 5 others so severely that they plunged, helpless, into the sea. Commander William Saunders later testified with conviction that without the proximity fuses, his ship would have been utterly overwhelmed within the first 10 minutes of the assault. The remarkable ability to engage targets without the need for precise range finding allowed the Aaron Ward's guns to shift their fire rapidly between multiple threats, a feat that would have been simply impossible with the old-time fused ammunition. These incredible accounts were not isolated incidents. They were replicated across the entire fleet. During the 10 major Kikusui operations, which raged from April 6 to June 22, 1945, Japanese forces launched approximately 1,900 aircraft in organized kamikaze attacks. American naval forces, relying primarily on their VT-fused 5-inch shells, managed to destroy hundreds of these attackers long before they could ever reach their targets. Statistics compiled by the Operations Research Group revealed a stark truth. Ships equipped with proximity-fused ammunition were 3 times more likely to survive a concentrated kamikaze attack than those that were still relying mainly on conventional ammunition. The proximity fuse had successfully transformed what should have been a catastrophic tactical innovation into a costly, but ultimately manageable, threat. The vast disparity in technological adaptation became glaringly obvious as the campaign wore on. American forces were constantly refining their proximity fuse tactics, discovering that the VT shells were particularly lethal when fired in specific patterns that created overlapping spheres of deadly fragments. Ships began to coordinate their fire to erect these VT boxes, deadly traps through which the kamikaze aircraft had no choice but to fly. The Japanese, in contrast, found themselves with limited options, able to respond only with tactical variations like dawn attacks, multi-axis approaches, and mixing conventional and suicide aircraft, none of which could overcome the fundamental, game-changing advantage of a shell that knew precisely when to explode. The production statistics alone told the epic story of industrial warfare at its absolute apex. By June of 1945, American factories were operating at a fever pitch, producing an astonishing 70,000 proximity fuses every single day. The entire war effort would ultimately see over 22 million proximity fuses manufactured, at a staggering cost that exceeded $1 billion in 1940s currency, roughly equivalent to $15 billion in today's dollars. The Crosley Corporation, a key player in this massive undertaking, employed 10,000 workers across 3 shifts, operating 7 days a week. Through the incredible efficiencies of mass production, the cost of each individual fuse had plummeted from $732 in 1942 to a mere $18 by 1945. This massive investment proved its worth many times over when Navy analysis later indicated that the proximity fuses had prevented the loss of dozens of ships during the Okinawa campaign alone. Japanese industrial capacity, crippled by relentless strategic bombing and severe resource shortages, could produce nothing that could even begin to compare. While Japanese scientists had grasped the theoretical concept of the proximity fuse, German reports on Allied special ammunition had reached Japan via submarine. They simply lacked the industrial infrastructure required to develop and mass-produce such sophisticated devices. The vacuum tube technology alone demanded a level of precision manufacturing capabilities that Japan's war-ravaged industry could no longer hope to achieve. Furthermore, Japanese radar development, a critical component for understanding the principles behind the proximity fuse, remained primitive when compared to the advanced American systems. The Type 22 radar, which was Japan's most advanced naval set, operated at wavelengths that made the necessary miniaturization impossible, even if the manufacturing capacity had existed. The undeniable effectiveness of the proximity fuse began to influence Japanese tactical doctrine in the final, desperate stages of the campaign. By May of 1945, kamikaze pilots were being instructed to approach the American task forces at their maximum possible altitude before plunging into a steep, vertical dive onto their targets, a tactic born of the desperate hope of minimizing their exposure to the deadly VT-fused anti-aircraft fire. This tactical adjustment, while it did manage to reduce their losses during the initial approach, made accurate targeting nearly impossible. Ships could easily maneuver out of the path of the dive, and the high-altitude approach gave the radar operators even more precious time to track the incoming aircraft. The attempted solution, in the end, proved to be counterproductive. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, the commander of the amphibious forces at Okinawa, unequivocally credited the proximity fuses with making the entire invasion possible. In a letter addressed to the Chief of Naval Operations, Turner wrote with stark clarity, "Without the VT fuse, our losses from suicide attacks would have been unbearable. The Japanese kamikaze was a formidable weapon that could have changed the outcome of the Pacific War if not for our technological superiority in anti-aircraft defense." His assessment was powerfully echoed by Admiral Mark Mitcher, whose own flagship, the USS Bunker Hill, survived a devastating kamikaze strike on May 11th, partly because the proximity-fused fire from his escort ships destroyed 3 other attackers that would have undoubtedly finished off the crippled carrier. Admiral Arleigh Burke, Mitch's chief of staff, later recalled the profound effectiveness of the proximity fuses during a 1978 interview. "When I went as chief of staff to Admiral Mitcher, who commanded the fast carrier task forces, all the 5-inch/38 and 5-inch/25 ammunition was fitted with VT fuses. And as you well know, those fuses knocked down enemy planes by the dozens. Had it not been for those fuses, our ship losses and casualties in the fast carriers in the last half of the war would have been enormously larger." The proximity fuse's impact stretched far beyond mere statistics. The technology fundamentally altered the very morale equation that had made the kamikaze tactics viable in the first place. Japanese military doctrine was built upon the grim assumption that the certainty of death for their pilots would be balanced by the near certainty of striking enemy ships. When the success rates plummeted to below 20% due to the impenetrable defenses created by the proximity fuse, the exchange became unsustainable, even by the brutal, unforgiving calculus of suicide warfare. Young Japanese pilots, many of them university students who had been drafted into the special attack units, began to understand the horrifying truth that their deaths would most likely achieve nothing. Letters recovered after the war's end revealed a growing and painful awareness among the kamikaze pilots that the American defenses had evolved far beyond what their commanders had promised them. Lieutenant Yukio Seki, the leader of the first official kamikaze unit in October 1944, had achieved devastating success against the escort carriers in Leyte Gulf at a time when proximity fuses comprised only 25% of the anti-aircraft ammunition. By the time of the Battle for Okinawa, his successors were facing a fundamentally different and far deadlier reality. Lieutenant Commander Goro Nanaka, leading the elite Thunder Gods Corps, which was equipped with the terrifying Oka flying bombs, lost his entire squadron on March 21, 1945, without a single Oka even reaching its launch position. American fighters, expertly guided by their radar intercept officers, shot down all 18 of the lumbering Betty bombers. But even if they had managed to break through that first line of defense, the solid wall of VT-fused anti-aircraft fire waiting for them would have been utterly impenetrable. The sheer technical sophistication of the proximity fuse represented more than just superior manufacturing capabilities. The device embodied fundamental, groundbreaking advances in electronics, materials science, and systems integration that Japan simply could not hope to match. The miniaturized vacuum tubes, manufactured with incredible precision by Sylvania and Raytheon, used special glass formulations that were engineered to withstand tremendous shock. The battery system, ingeniously activated by the very acceleration of the shell being fired, used an electrolyte that remained stable for months, yet activated instantly the moment it was needed. The radio frequency was precisely calculated to minimize any potential interference, while maximizing its detection range. Each and every element of the fuse represented years of focused, dedicated research, backed by virtually unlimited funding. Meanwhile, Japanese anti-aircraft defenses remained tragically primitive. The Type 98 100mm anti-aircraft gun, which was Japan's best heavy A weapon, still relied on antiquated mechanical time fuses that required manual setting before each and every shot. Japanese naval vessels at Okinawa, including the colossal super battleship Yamato during her final, desperate sortie, carried anti-aircraft ammunition that was technologically equivalent to what the Americans had been using at Pearl Harbor. When the Yamato faced a swarm of over 300 American aircraft on April 7, 1945, her 162 anti-aircraft guns fired thousands upon thousands of rounds, but managed to shoot down fewer than 10 of her attackers. The Americans lost just 10 aircraft while sinking the world's largest battleship, a stark and brutal demonstration of the immense technological disparity. The proximity fuse also enabled entirely new tactical innovations that would have been impossible with conventional ammunition. American destroyers developed the VT umbrella technique, firing their proximity fuse shells in predetermined patterns high above friendly ships that were under attack. The shells would then detonate at set distances, creating a protective dome of deadly fragments that any attacking kamikaze aircraft would have to penetrate. This technique proved to be particularly effective against the dreaded Oka flying bombs, whose incredible high speed made them nearly impossible to track with conventional fire control systems, but left them vulnerable to the solid wall of fragments created by the VT patterns. During the entire, grueling Okinawa campaign, from April 1 to June 22, 1945, the United States Navy expended approximately 150,000 proximity-fused 5-inch shells. The effectiveness of this expenditure was undeniable. While VT-fused ammunition represented 45% of the heavy anti-aircraft ammunition fired, It accounted for the vast majority of the confirmed kamikaze kills at longer ranges. The old-time fused shells, which comprised 55% of the ammunition expended, proved to be effective primarily at very close ranges, where accuracy was less of a critical factor. The cold, hard mathematics demonstrated that the proximity fuses were approximately 3 to 4 times more effective than conventional ammunition against the relentless kamikaze attacks. The differential in human cost was equally dramatic. Ships that exhausted their supply of VT ammunition and were forced to revert to the old-time fused shells suffered casualty rates that were significantly higher during subsequent attacks. The destroyer USS Drexler, which was attacked after having expended all of her proximity-fused ammunition on May 28, was sunk in less than a minute by 2 kamikazes that would have almost certainly been destroyed by VT fire. Her 158 dead represented more casualties than many destroyers suffered during entire campaigns while they were equipped with an adequate supply of proximity-fused ammunition. Admiral Raymond Spruance, the commander of the Fifth Fleet, experienced the kamikaze threat in a deeply personal way when his own flagship, the USS Indianapolis, was hit in March, forcing him to transfer his command to the USS New Mexico, which was also struck in May. He would later write, "This is my second experience with a suicide plane making a hit on board my own ship, and I have seen 4 other ships hit near me. The suicide plane is a very effective weapon, which we must not underestimate." Yet, Spruance also keenly recognized that without the proximity fuses, the kamikaze threat would have been far more devastating. The VT fuse has saved countless ships and lives. It is the margin between bearable and unbearable losses. The strategic implications of this new technology were crystal clear to the military planners who were preparing for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of the Japanese home islands. Intelligence estimates indicated that Japan had reserved approximately 10,000 aircraft for kamikaze attacks against the impending invasion fleet. However, American war planners, confident in the proven effectiveness of the proximity fuse, calculated that their defensive requirements could be met. The production of VT fuses was scheduled to be ramped up to an incredible 100,000 units daily by September 1945. New and improved Mark 53 and Mark 58 fuses, boasting enhanced sensitivity and reliability, were already entering mass production. The invasion fleet would have carried over 1 million proximity-fused shells, creating an anti-aircraft defense of a scale and sophistication unprecedented in all of military history. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 brought the war to an end before this climactic test could ever occur. But the proximity fuse's profound impact on the Japanese surrender calculations should not be underestimated. Japanese military assessments, captured after the war, acknowledged the sheer impossibility of mounting a successful defense against an invasion fleet that was protected by what they ominously referred to as electronic shells. Admiral Soma Toyoda, the chief of the Naval General Staff, testified after the war that the Japanese Navy had calculated that their homeland defense kamikaze attacks would achieve less than a 10% success rate against the proximity fuse defenses, a rate so low that it would render the entire tactic militarily worthless. Post-war analysis revealed the full, staggering scope of the proximity fuse achievement. The program had mobilized a network of 112 companies in addition to the main contractors, creating a vast industrial ecosystem that was entirely dedicated to producing the most sophisticated military electronics of the era. British scientists, who had actually conceived the original proximity fuse concept back in 1940 but lacked the resources for its development, graciously acknowledged that American industrial capability had achieved what they had considered to be impossible. The British had concluded that making vacuum tubes that could survive the violent launch from a gun was an insurmountable obstacle. American engineers, through sheer ingenuity and determination, proved them wrong. The incredible effectiveness of the proximity fuse against the kamikaze attacks would go on to influence military technology development for decades to come. The principle of smart munitions, weapons that could essentially think for themselves, became a central tenet of American military doctrine. Modern anti-aircraft missiles all use a form of proximity fusing that is directly descended from the original VT fuse, while the Phalanx close-in weapons system that protects today's warships operates on principles that were pioneered during the desperate defense against the Kamikazes. The technological superiority that defeated human guidance with electronic intelligence established a paradigm that continues to shape military strategy to this day. Japanese veterans who were interviewed after the war expressed a continued sense of amazement at the American proximity fuse technology. Commander Tadashi Nakajima, who had helped to establish the Kamikaze program, admitted with stark honesty, "We knew the Americans had superior technology, but the proximity fuse was beyond our imagination. Our pilots reported shells exploding exactly where they flew, as if guided by invisible hands. It destroyed not just our aircraft, but the fundamental premise of the special attack, that spiritual power could overcome material disadvantage." Captain Eiichiro Gio, an early advocate of the kamikaze tactics who survived the war, later reflected on the proximity fuse's profound impact. "We believed that the willingness to die would guarantee success. The American electronic fuse proved that technology could defeat even the most determined human sacrifice. It was not just a weapon, but a statement about the very nature of modern warfare." The stark contrast between the proximity fuse and the kamikaze attacks represented two fundamentally different philosophies about the value of human life and the role of technology in warfare. The American investment in preserving life through superior technology stood in direct opposition to the Japanese willingness to expend life as a weapon itself. The proximity fuse, by making the kamikaze attacks survivable for the American forces, invalidated the cruel, cold logic that drove so many young Japanese men to a deliberate, certain death. In this sense, the electronic fuse represented not just a technological superiority, but a moral statement about how wars should be fought. The legacy of the proximity fuse in defeating the kamikaze attacks extends far beyond the realm of military history. The crash development program that created the VT fuse established the very model for subsequent American technical achievements, from the space program to the dawn of modern computing. The unique collaboration between universities, private industry, and military requirements that successfully produced 22 million sophisticated electronic devices under the immense pressure of wartime demonstrated a level of American organizational capabilities that would come to define the post-war era. The Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, the very place where the proximity fuse was perfected, continued its work as a center of military technology innovation, developing everything from guided missiles to satellite navigation. Dr. Morozov, the visionary who led the proximity fuse development, later reflected on this monumental achievement. "We saved lives by making weapons more effective. Every kamikaze shot down by a proximity fuse meant American sailors who went home to their families. That was worth any amount of effort and expense." His team's success powerfully validated the American approach of applying scientific knowledge to solve military problems, a philosophy that would dominate defense strategy throughout the entirety of the Cold War. For the Japanese, the failure of the kamikaze tactics against the proximity fuse defenses marked the definitive end of long-held beliefs about spiritual superiority overcoming material disadvantage. The young pilots who died in futile attacks against the impenetrable walls of VT-fused explosions became symbols not of noble sacrifice, but of a military leadership that had catastrophically failed to recognize the new technological reality. Modern Japan's heavy emphasis on technological development and innovation can be traced, in part, back to the harsh, unforgiving lessons of 1945, when electronic fuses defeated human pilots with a cold, mechanical precision. The mathematical precision of the proximity fuse's success, 310 rounds per kill versus 1,162 for the old-time fused shells, translated directly into saved ships, preserved lives, and ultimately, a strategic victory. Each VT fuse that functioned correctly represented an American sailor who would return home, a ship that survived to fight another day, an undeniable proof that technology could provide a decisive advantage in the theater of modern warfare. The confirmed destruction of hundreds of kamikaze aircraft by proximity fuses before they ever reached their targets represented thousands of American casualties prevented, dozens of ships saved, and the ultimate validation of the billion-dollar investment in electronic warfare. The story of technology defeating fatalism reached its dramatic climax in the blood-soaked waters off Okinawa, where radar-guided fighters, proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells, and sophisticated damage control systems prevailed against the chilling tactic of deliberate suicide attacks. The kamikaze pilots, brave young men sacrificed to a lost cause, flew headlong into an electronic killing field that their commanders had never even anticipated. Their deaths, while they did achieve tactical damage that horrified the American sailors, ultimately failed to achieve their strategic goal of making the cost of invasion unbearable. The proximity fuse had successfully transformed their sacrifice from a devastating weapon into a manageable threat. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal eloquently summarized the proximity fuse's immense contribution. The proximity fuse has helped blaze the trail to Japan. Without the protection this ingenious device has given the surface ships of the fleet, our westward push could not have been so swift, and the cost in men and ships would have been immeasurably greater. This powerful assessment, which was shared by military leaders throughout the Pacific theater, was a clear recognition that electronic intelligence had decisively defeated human sacrifice. The final accounting was both sobering and decisive. During the entirety of the Okinawa campaign, Japanese kamikaze attacks managed to sink 36 American ships and damage 368 others. As terrible as these losses were, they represented the survival of the vast majority of the ships that were attacked, a rate that would have been utterly impossible without the protection of the proximity fuses. The 4,907 American sailors who were killed by kamikazes at Okinawa, while representing the Navy's bloodiest single battle, were but a fraction of the casualties that conventional analysis had predicted would occur without the benefit of VT technology. The Japanese losses, on the other hand, were absolute. Approximately 1,900 aircraft and their pilots were expended in the organized kamikaze attacks during the 10 Kikusui operations, plus hundreds more in improvised suicide attempts, all while achieving tactical results that fell far short of their strategic requirements. The proximity fuse's decisive victory over the kamikaze attacks demonstrated a fundamental truth of modern warfare, that technological superiority could overcome any advantages in numbers, determination, or even the willingness to die. The American sailors who manned the 5-inch guns with their VT ammunition held a decisive advantage over the Japanese pilots who were sealed in their cockpits for a one-way mission. The miniaturized radio transmitter in the nose of each shell represented an industrial capacity, a scientific knowledge, and an organizational capability that no amount of martial spirit could ever hope to match. When the electronic fuse met the human pilot in the skies over Okinawa, the outcome had already been predetermined by the factories in Cincinnati, the laboratories in Maryland, and the fundamental American belief that technology could preserve life while still achieving victory. The mathematical reality of the situation was inescapable. A proximity fuse that weighed less than 5 pounds, contained 130 electronic components, was manufactured for just $18 by 1945, and functioned for less than 30 seconds, could utterly destroy a kamikaze aircraft along with its pilot, which represented years of training, tons of aluminum and steel, and most tragically, a human life that could never be replaced. When this grim equation was multiplied across thousands of engagements throughout the vast Pacific theater, it translated into an American victory achieved through a technological superiority that helped to determine the very outcome of the war. The proximity fuse's stunning success against the kamikaze attacks served as the ultimate validation for the entire American approach to warfare in the 20th century. An investment in technology, a faith in industrial production, and a core belief that superior equipment could overcome even the most fanatical determination all proved to be correct in the most extreme test imaginable. For Japan, the failure of the kamikaze against the impenetrable proximity fuse defenses represented not just a military defeat, but the complete invalidation of their core beliefs about the spirit triumphing over matter. The electronic fuse had defeated the divine wind, proving that in the brutal crucible of modern warfare, advanced technology would always triumph over human sacrifice. The Pacific War powerfully demonstrated that in the realm of modern naval warfare, the ability to destroy aircraft at a distance was the ultimate key to survival. The nations that could design, produce, and deploy superior defensive technology held a decisive advantage over those that were forced to rely on human courage alone. The comparison of the proximity fuse versus the kamikaze illustrates this principle at its most fundamental level: American electronic sophistication decisively defeating Japanese human sacrifice. The VT Fuze's success at Okinawa firmly established technological superiority as the single most determining factor in military effectiveness. The stark contrast between the American and Japanese approaches to anti-aircraft defense ultimately tells a larger, more profound story about the nature of industrial warfare in the 20th century. The nations that could successfully marshal their scientific knowledge, their manufacturing capability, and their organizational expertise to produce superior military technology held insurmountable advantages. The proximity fuse represented the very culmination of America's greatest strengths: innovative engineering, mass production, and a systematic, problem-solving approach applied to military challenges. Its triumph over the kamikaze demonstrated conclusively that in modern war, victory belonged to those who could think, build, and deploy better technology. The mathematical precision of the proximity fuse's effectiveness, 3 to 4 times more effective than conventional ammunition, reducing the required rounds per kill by a staggering 73%, and preventing the loss of countless ships, translated into a strategic victory that preserved American lives while defeating a determined and formidable enemy. This critical differential, when multiplied across the vast expanse of the Pacific theater, helped to secure the American victory and firmly establish technological superiority as the unshakable foundation of post-war military doctrine. The electronic fuse had not just defeated the kamikaze, it had validated the entire American approach to warfare through the application of superior technology, proving definitively that in the life-and-death matters of war, the quality of the equipment could overcome any quantity of sacrifice.